I thought was delightful because Hat I had, I mean, a great deal of affection. I mean, I adored her. She was a very warm, lovable woman. And I remember saying to her once when we were doing the carry-ons, I said, you know, she knew about my admiration of a coward, and I said, one of my earliest recordings, you know, was The Welcoming Land, and it's one of my 78s, and I lost it. I said, I lent it to someone, I never got it back. I've always regretted that bitterly, because it's a lovely, it was a marvellous recording, because Coward's recording of poetry that isn't his own is really remarkably good. His standard is colossally high. Wonderful the way he did this particular poem. It was called The Welcoming Land, Clemens Dane. And I remember saying it to her and thought no more about it. And a year later, when I went for Christmas with Hat, on the table we all were given presents from Hat and decorated was this recording she'd found for me. She'd been all over the place, second-hand shops, gramophone record shops, to find this 78 recording of The Welcoming Land. And it was lovely. I always think of her when I think of the poem because it's got some lovely lines about this land of ours, England, being a welcoming place. And he says at one point, hunted Huguenots, Jews from Spain, fled to this wise island, drew sobbing breath in easy air, and smelled the May, sweet as a kiss on a winter day. And that was what Hat was for me. Somebody who was as sweet as a kiss on a winter day. And whenever I hear that particular line, I always think of her in that context, because she was the most heartwarming of persons. And the other curious incident on a carry-on, which I always remember, was when Phil Silvers came to do Camel. It was called Carry On, Follow That Camel. And this curious title, Carry On, Follow That Camel. And he had a lot of trouble with his contact lenses, which kept falling out. And we were in the desert, and especially in this desert in the sand, you know. They were always falling out, and he was always saying, can you find my contact lenses? Anyone see my contact lenses? And he was always telling us endless stories. They were very funny. Most of them had a very good tag, and he told us about being in a USO show. And he said, when we got to Rome, Frank Sinatra said, well, I'll go and see the Pope. You can come in with me. I said, don't be silly, Frank. You can't just walk in on the Pope, you know. And he said, yeah, I can. I got a few strings. I can pull the embassy. And he said, certainly he did. And the next day, there we were in the Sistine Chapel with one of these acolytes and a cardinal, you know, saying, come this way. The Holy Father will see you now. And he said, there we were. We actually got to see the Pope. I couldn't believe it. And he said to Sinatra, well, my son, I know you are a very fine tenor. And he said, no, Father. He said, I'm a baritone. He said, oh, I'm sorry, my son. I thought you were a tenor. He said, no, I'm a baritone. He said, and then he turned to me and said, Mr. Silvers, I believe you are a funny man. He said, I gave him a rundown on my early days in burlesque. He was kind of cute. He was kind of interested, you know. And I was telling him about all this stuff, you know. And then he said to me, well, my son, is there anything I can do for you? Any favor you would like me to do? I said, yeah, I got this rosary in a tobacco tin. I kept this rosary in a tobacco tin because I said to the Pope, I want you, I've not had anyone else touch it. I lift the lid of this tin. I want you personally to put your hand on this rosary and bless it, because then I can go back. I want to give it to Crosby because I want to be able to say that it's personally blessed by the Pope. And he said, I will do better than that, my son. He said he went away and he bought back these rosaries, which he gave me 6, and they were all stamped with the Vatican seal in cellophane. Nobody else touched them. And he said, take those, my son. One for Mr. Crosby and his wife, and I know his children. He said, yeah, I love it. Oh, thank you. That's great. He said, I was really chuffed, you know. I came out of there, and we're on the steps of the chapel, and Sinatra gave me a real, hey, he hit me right in the stomach. You know, really winded me. I said, oh, what'd you do that for? And he said, you bum. I get you the interview with the Pope and you plug Crosby. Yeah, oh, yes, a question.
Yes.
Yes?
A recent development in your career has been that you've turned into being an author. Have you enjoyed promoting your first book, Acid Drops?
Yes, well, you are rather shoved around. It's worse than touring. It's worse than touring with a play, I think. But I've heard some delightful things. I heard from an authoress who was at one of her signing sessions, and, you know, sometimes the diction isn't that good. And she said this lady said Emma Chiswick, so she put down best wishes to Emma Chiswick. And then this woman said, what's you written in here? And she said, your name, Emma Chiswick. She said, I said, how much is it? But the trouble with that writing, do you see, the trouble with writing, especially a book like Acid Drops, which is really all about put-downs, acid put-downs, malignant thrusts, if you like, is that you remember afterwards loads of things that you wanted to put in and you didn't. I mean, one of the lovely put-downs was told me by Jeremy Swan. We were doing Jack and Ori, and he said that when Bobby Helpman was doing the Dream in America, they played a stadium at one point and did the ballet in a floodlit sports stadium, and Robert was given the umpire's room because they felt, you know, it was the most commodious room. And so he was given the umpire's room, and then Boy went round calling the half, you know, and knocked on the door for half an hour and got no reply, so he went in. And on a table, Robert Helpman had put a chair, and on top of that chair, he was standing, craning with a mirror and a makeup stick against the one naked light bulb that was hanging from the ceiling. And he said, "Are you all right up there?" doing this very elaborate eye makeup for Oberon. And gold and green, you see. He said, "Are you all right up there, Sir Robert?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, I'm fine." Goodness knows how these umpires manage. It's a marvellous reply, you know. And it is so essentially theatrical because I think actors are absorbed so often, you know, by their craft, by their profession, and have really got no interest in anything else, you know.
Just a minute.
Just a minute?
I mean, just a minute. Could you tell us about Just a Minute? Because you always seem to win it.
Oh, I don't always.
Cheat.
I don't always. No.
You cheat. That's what you do.
Yes, well, I'm afraid. Yes, I have to answer. I have to answer honestly and truthfully. I have cheated, yes. What I do is sometimes go into German because I think, well, they can't fault me on that, you see, because it doesn't say you've got to speak in English, so I can do a bit of, ich weiß nicht, was soll es bedeuten, dass ich so traurig wie ein Märchen aus alten Zeiten, das kommt mir nicht aus dem Sinn, because I know one or two songs, and I get away with that. Or I do Stanley Unwin. I did Stanley Unwin on it and won on that occasion by saying, positive thoughts trains rise in the early morning, the wing thoughts of clarity in the mind, low to open that very pretty ancient British sparkles where the wax was fluffy in the eardrobes in order to pass the siren safely with a dangly chandelier, Harry the Acres, Catherine of Arabold, which I think is lovely. Catherine of Arabold, because you feel she's there, don't you? He does these marvellous names. You feel it is the real thing. You know it is the real thing. I always love Stanley Unwin for that. And I've won sometimes on that, but that Parsons, Nicholas Parsons, he says things like, well, I'm not lying there, your diction's appalling. And I said, as good as yours when you got your teeth in. Well, and then he said, disgraceful, really, Kenneth. I couldn't talk like that. And I said, of course you couldn't. You haven't got my vocabulary. Got a laugh.
Yeah.
That's a great thing. So what else are we up to?
Oh,
is it Ted?
Yes,
Ted.
Ted.
Mould, my love, yes.
I'd like to know, Kenneth, how somebody as unique as yourself, pungent wit, every other sentence an aphorism, how do you cope with public recognition in your daily life?
Yes, a very good question. I mean, it would be wrong to say that I've always got a snappy cash answer. I certainly haven't. On occasions, I've seen somebody carry it off with incredible aplomb. It happened when I was with Stanley Baxter, because he had an open touring car, and so he could see the public, they could see him, but he had the ability to depart very quickly, put his foot down on the accelerator and go. And he was about to drive off when on the pavement a man went by who saw him and said, "Ah, here. Don't tell me here. No, 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 don't tell me. Don't, no, don't tell me." And Stanley drove off and said, "I won't." Covered in carbon monoxide or whatever. But that familiarity thing can be very funny. I remember Kenneth Connor telling me he was on set. It was Trio by Somerset Maugham, and Somerset was there, you know, with an incredible dedication in a chair with his name written on it. And they were watching the scene, which was of a dive from an incredible height and very, very suspenseful. And they were all watching the scene. And Somerset Maugham was watching the scene. And this painter with a can and a brush came by and nudged him and said, "Another winner there, Somerset." and it's comparable to a story I tell in Aesop's about T.S. Eliot getting a taxi. And I read this in the Times. It was a letter from Valerie Eliot wrote it about him getting into a cab and the driver pushing back the glass panel and saying,
T.S. Eliot, isn't it? He said, yes, I didn't know you would recognise... Oh, I know them all. I've had them all. I've had them all in my cab. Oh, yes, I've had them all. I know them all. He said, who do you think I had in here last week? Bertie Russell. Bertie Russell in my cab. Greatest philosopher in the Western world, right? And he said, oh, yes, right. You go, right. And you know? I said to him, Bert, what's it all about? And you know, the twit couldn't tell me.